Chapter 12, Revelations 3-4. Chapter 7, Revelations 3-4, 1993, 1994. Percy is 17 and 30, Harry is 13, Ginny is 12, Tom is still 16, and Sirius Black and Severus Snape are 33. You will likely be expelled for this, you know, is Snape's first comment once Percy opens his eyes. They are strangely still in the room of requirement. Percy is still on the floor. Everything is as it was except that the Grey Lady is gone, and somehow Snape has appeared. From Percy's vantage point, crumpled and aching on the ground, he has a hazy sense that Snape himself is a ghost, his dark hair dusted with white ash, and his face a grey, unhealthy pallor. Perhaps Percy is the one that is dead, though if he died and missed the point of decision that Myrtle and Anthony spoke so reverently about, he will be exceedingly upset. You're not dead, he tells himself, trying to reel in his careening thoughts. He blinks, absently registering that his glasses are smudged but not broken, and tries to take a steadying breath to force his body to focus on the problem at hand. Severus Snape. Tom, the diadem. I can explain, Percy says automatically, pushing himself to sit up. He feels slightly better, though his head is still swimming. The room has cooled considerably, most of the ashes have settled, so the air no longer looks filled with delicate snow. You will have to, Snape says, raising an eyebrow. Percy feels unsettled by the calm, conversational tone that Snape is using with him. It feels almost more dangerous than outright outrage, as if the conclusion to Snape's ire has already been decided, and he and Percy are strolling toward that destination without any hope of diverting their path. Does Dumbledore know? Snape peers at Percy closely. An interesting question, he says noncommittedly. Your girlfriend seemed to have the same concern. Penny. A second, Percy doubts himself, his two lives swimming before his eyes. He stretches out a hand and flexes his fingers, as if to ensure they are still connected to his body. You are still you, he remembers Tom saying. He fights down an explosion of panic and reaches out hesitantly with his magic, but he cannot feel any sign of Tom in his head or in his body. The ghost, Snape says, rolling his eyes at Percy's befuddled expression. She came to me, begged me not to tell a soul. Good old Myrtle. Percy feels a tremendous explosion of goodwill for his friend, and it strengthens him enough to get painfully to his feet. Snape has not yet hexed him into oblivion, so presumably he has a chance of talking his way out of this. Where is she now? Guarding the door. Sit, won't you? Snape says, conjuring two chairs. Percy sits gingerly on one. A second later, he is bound tightly to the chair by ropes that snaked out of Snape's wand without even the courtesy of a verbal spell as warning. Well, Percy supposes he should have expected that. He shifts uncomfortably under the binds and tries to force his mind to pay attention. Many years ago, Percy made contingency plans for coming clean to various people in his life he could not simply obliviate: his parents, each of his siblings, his professors. He had written out detailed speeches, aiming to create a series of narratives that would be compelling to each person. He cannot recall the one he'd planned for Snape, but he tries not to panic. Percy has grown practiced at the art of dissembling, and Snape has no reason to think anything other of Percy than that he is a precocious, ambitious, and slightly foolish seventh-year student. Snape holds up a small black diary. Let's start your explanation with this, shall we? Percy blinks rapidly. The probability of revealing the truth inches a few notches higher. What had he decided to use with Snape? Sheer honesty, if he can remember correctly. He has the advantage, in that he knows that Snape is against the Dark Lord, and he knows why. Percy could try to lie, but there is no lie that he can think of that will prevent Snape from going to Dumbledore with the knowledge that Percy Weasley is writing to Tom Riddle. The best he can do is try and say only half of the truth. I am trying to defeat the Dark Lord, he says, and waits for a reaction. He does not wait long, but he is disappointed. Snape raises an incredulous eyebrow, but otherwise does not react like Percy had expected, with explosions or anger, as if he were not surprised to hear Percy say such an outrageous thing. Do tell. The Dark Lord created Horcruxes, Percy says honestly. Snape's eyebrow inches higher. I thought I could convince Tom to tell me what they were. And you discovered this before or after he used you to set a basilisk on your sister? Percy flinches. After, he lies. Snape regards him silently for a long second and then reaches inside his pocket for a small, crystal bottle with a colorless liquid. Tell me, Mr. Weasley, Do you believe yourself capable of lying under Veritaserum? Of course not, Professor, Percy says at once. But I would tell you the truth without the potion, and I would point out that it is rather unethical to dose a student with a restricted substance, sir. But I know you already must be aware of that. Snape flicks his gaze deliberately around the wreckage of the room, as if to convey that they have already moved beyond the bounds of ethicality, and then steps closer to Percy, uncorking the bottle. Tongue out, Weasley. If you will not cooperate, I have no qualms ensuring your compliance. As the drops hit his tongue, colorless and odorless but nevertheless searing, Percy's first instinct is to panic. His second is to laugh. Weakly at first, and then gathering momentum, the stress of the last few months, years, bleeding into the wild edge of his chuckles, assuming that the potion is real, and the way that his tongue begins to feel heavy in his mouth suggests that it is. Then Percy is going to tell the truth. Percy has thought about Veritaserum before. There is an extremely low probability that he will be able to answer the questions truthfully without revealing his secret. To his extreme embarrassment, his laughter turns into tears, dripping wetly down his face. He avoids looking at Snape, who is likely contemplating what dark spell to use to disembowel Percy for his disgusting display of weakness and emotion. How can he explain to Snape why he is crying? Exhaustion, fear, anxiety, relief. He's been toying with the idea of telling Snape for years, and finally Snape has forced his hand. Spare me your adolescent attempts at manipulation, Snape says, irritation edging into the bark of his voice. Percy shakes his head and gets himself under control. I'll tell you everything, he gasps, and the sheer relief he feels at saying those words threatens to set him off again. But you have to promise me you won't take action until you've heard the whole story. Snape looks at him dismissively. I am not one for hasty action, otherwise I would have killed you already. This brings Percy up short. He swallows and tries to refocus. He's become used to thinking of Snape as his slightly sardonic professor, someone who is in many ways an ally. If pressed, he would even say that Snape likes him, or at the least tolerates him. But Snape has no reason to trust Percy. He has no reason to think of him as anything other than a 17-year boy caught up with the Dark Lord. In for a nut, in for a galleon, Percy thinks, not for the first time that year. Percy is a Gryffindor, after all. It takes bravery to stand up to one's family. It takes courage to believe one's own convictions. It takes strength to admit to a fault, to return to those you've wronged, to display contrition. Percy has always done the hard thing, even if those choices seemed easy from afar. Look at my memories, he says, meeting Snape's eyes. I won't fight you. If he is to partner with Snape, Snape needs to be on his side without question. Snape cannot betray him to Dumbledore or work against him. Percy had concluded that long ago, which was one reason he had hesitated to come clean to Snape thus far. He could not give Snape a half-truth, a partial lie. Snape raises a sardonic eyebrow. If you try to lie to me, I will kill you and make it look like an accident, he says conversationally, and it sounds so much like Tom that Percy abruptly is reminded that Snape spent years working with the Dark Lord. He swallows hard, but does not back away. If I try to lie to you at this point, I probably deserve it, Percy says, and tips his head up. He has a split second to review his chronology before the man breathes Legilimens, and they are sucked jointly into the whirl of Percy's memories. Legilimency has, for Percy, been a completely theoretical exercise thus far, save his one fairly unsuccessful attempt at entering Borgin's mind. His only study partner is Myrtle, and she can hardly cast a spell on him to read his mind. He had thought it might be like his nightly occlumency exercises, wherein he reviews the memories of the day and neatly parcels them into the bookshelves that represent his mind. Instead, it is like his few brief attempts at Quidditch, wild, uncontrollable, and distinctly nauseating. Snape, predictably, follows Tom Riddle. He narrows in unerringly at Percy's first engagement with the diary, and they jointly relive Percy's hesitant, nervous exhilaration, the sense of adrenaline that fills him when he sees Tom's smooth writing. The memories flip by like pages of the diary. Percy, hunched over the book before bed, ink staining his pillowcases. Tom, pulling him into his memory, the sepia-toned colors of the memory within a memory. Percy's look of blank confusion as he stands before a beast of a basilisk mouthing words that are not his own. Stop, Percy pleads when the sight of the basilisk swaying its horned head is enough to pause Snape's rampage of his mind. Please, let me show you. He feels Snape's burgeoning anger. With a gasp, Percy wrenches his mind from the other man's grasp. Snape towers over him. You dare, he hisses, his face ugly with his rage. You dare try to lie to me. Typical Gryffindor arrogance. You think you are the first from your house to be swayed by the Dark Lord. I have seen men braver than you reduced to ash at his feet, and you dare to think he will view you as an equal, as his right-hand man. Percy flinches at these words spit out through clenched teeth. Snape has the completely wrong idea, he realizes with dawning horror. No, sir, please, please, let me explain. I have allowed myself to be fooled by you, Snape continues, cutting off Percy's feeble protests. Let that thought bring you comfort before your death, child. I admit I allowed your pathetic forays into dark magic to be unchecked. I thought your adolescent desire for power could be redirected into an area of substance. I permitted you to continue this foolishness, content to observe from afar. I watched you stumble toward a cliff you would not be able to climb should you fall, and I tried to push you away from it. He stops abruptly, but Percy cannot break the silence, frozen as he is in his seat by the sight of Snape wearing his anger as both shield and sword. But no longer, Snape whispers, and the quiet is more jarring than his shouts. You are no more than the rest of them, Percival Weasley. Arrogant, brash, idiotic. The Dark Lord has no use for you, and neither do I. Percy flinches again, realizing only now how much Snape's esteem has come to mean to him, how cutting it is to hear this dismissal. He gathers up the remnants of his courage and tries once again to meet Snape's eyes, though his own eyes fill with those same perfidious tears. Please, he whispers again, holding fast to the conviction that he can just show Snape the truth. The other man will listen. Let me show you. Snape eyes him for a prolonged second and then barks a laugh of mirthless amusement. You never learn, he comments, as if disappointed. Very well. Whisper your inane secrets into my ears, Weasley. Make them good. They may be your last words before your death. Whether you die by my hand or by the Dementors in Azkaban, rest assured you will no longer do harm. Percy inhales sharply and nods. Let me show you, he repeats. The whole thing, please, Professor. Do not interrupt until the end. You presume, Snape begins, outraged. Please, Percy breaks in, and perhaps the conviction in his voice makes up for the tears still trailing softly down his cheeks, for Snape allows himself to be interrupted. He gives a single, terse nod, whispers the spell, and they are once again in Percy's mind, staring at a basilisk. Percy lets the memory play out while he gathers his mental strength. He cannot remember where he planned to begin, so he goes with his instinct. He is a logical, ordered person. He begins at the beginning, as one does. First steps first, and then the second. Percy, 11, sorted into Gryffindor. Snape's derision echoes inside Percy's head, but he stays true to his earlier promise and does not interrupt the flow of memories. Percy excelling, though more at lessons than at raw, unadulterated magic. He takes tutelage in charms and transfiguration and herbology, but not potions. In fact, he privately does not think very much of Professor Snape. A professor ought to be able to adapt to a wide range of learning styles, rather than aiming merely to rule the classroom with an iron fist. Somewhere in his head, Snape snorts as this thought solidifies. His family mocks him. Oh, how he resents their mockery, their refusal to celebrate his academic achievements. Fred is the worst, always taking the mickey, perfect Percy the Ponce, echoing in his mind. Bill, always better than him, and Charlie, the rebel. His roommates tolerate him, but they do not like him. He is so lonely. A feeling that it is not fair that he alone is so lonely, that he alone feels sick to his stomach with the obligations that he feels were thrust upon him. But with his 5th year comes a prefect's badge, and Harry Potter. He feels Snape's attention sharpen as the differences in the timeline begin to become clear. Harry is at first merely a first year, albeit a famous one. Percy strives to be a good example for him, and for Ron, too. He's disappointed when Harry appears to be a rule-breaker, though a bloody good seeker. Ron seems destined to go the same way as Fred and George, getting detentions for some nonsense involving a dragon, losing needless house points, even battling a troll. And then the end of the year occurs, and Percy is sitting in the hospital wing with Fred and George and their parents, hearing Professor Dumbledore gravely explain that Ron was injured while preventing Professor Quirrell, possessed by a dark wizard, from stealing the Philosopher's Stone. His disbelief, his incredulity, his jealousy, Ron winning 50 house points in a public display, points awarded by the headmaster himself. Snape is cautiously confused. Percy can feel the other man thinking, putting the pieces together slowly. His 6th year. There is his blossoming relationship with Penny, of course, but suddenly the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Penny is frightened. They have many fights about what the best course of action ought to be. Percy passionately argues that Dumbledore needs to alert the Ministry, bring in the Auras, and allow the government to restore law and order to the school. Penny believes otherwise, trusting in Dumbledore to have their best interests at heart. Penny, petrified. Hermione, petrified. Harry Potter is a Parselmouth, and perhaps he does not really believe the rumors that Harry is the heir of Slytherin. For starters, he's 12. Percy is not stupid. Harry is involved somehow, whether willingly or unwillingly, and where Harry's involved, so is Ron. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Snape gives a start, but Percy does not let it faze him. They continue down the horrid events of that night, his fear and his guilt, culminating with the bizarre claims that Harry Potter has slain a basilisk. Dumbledore did not protect Penny. He did not protect Ginny. He did not protect Hermione, or Colin, or Justin. Professor Snape is the only one that does anything of use at all, smug satisfaction, even amidst these revelations. The next year, Percy is head boy, and he will use his power to protect the students when he can. Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban. Percy winces at the sharp burst of anger that spills from Snape's joined mind. Dumbledore chose him for head boy. Percy goes on extra patrols, begins learning about warding in his free time, reads about Sirius Black. The Ministry sends Dementors, and though they cause a chill in Percy's chest every time they float by, he pulls his robes around him tighter and hurries on. They are for his own protection. Once again, Ron is involved in some sort of mischief. Sirius Black tries to attack him in his bed, perhaps mistaking him for Harry. Percy wars with himself all year, but Ron is attacked again by Sirius Black. Professor Lupin is a werewolf. It is rather apparent that Dumbledore will do nothing to protect Ron, not if it interferes with whatever game he is playing with Harry. Many emotions leaking to Percy from Snape. Anger, hatred, resentment, shock. Something that may be understanding. Percy joins the Ministry. A junior position, but one he applies for and receives without anyone in his family helping him. His father is crushed that he chooses cauldron regulation instead of misuse of Muggle registration, but Percy has no interest in working with his father. He's going to make something out of himself. His name will carry its own weight. A breakthrough. Percy is chosen to assist Crouch at the Triwizard Tournament. It is a massive honor, and Percy finds it increasingly easier to quell the brief spasm of irritation that erupts every time Crouch misremembers his name. Especially after the whole nonsense at the Quidditch World Cup. Percy feels Snape's alert attention at the Dark Mark, floating in the sky. The Ministry must present a strong, united front. Clearly some fringe enthusiasts are trying to disrupt the peace, but Percy will do his part to not let that happen. Harry Bloody Potter is chosen for the Triwizard Tournament. At least Ron seems to come to his senses, realizing that Harry creates drama, that he makes unsafe and unwise decisions. Percy has his hands full with the tournament, but he makes time to observe Ron and Harry whenever he is at Hogwarts, and he sees how moody and unpredictable Harry is, how much Ron values his attention. It isn't an equal relationship. Cedric Diggory dies in a freak accident. Harry is distraught, claiming the death to be at the hands of he who must not be named. Of course he does. Harry is traumatized. He's alone in the world, really. Even if he is not intending to bring everything back to his past, he seems unable to move past you-know-who, to realize that he is not living in some sort of adventure novel with his name emblazoned on the cover. In the real world, there are more bogeymen than just one Dark Lord. Snape seems ready to interrupt, so Percy moves on quickly. Snape thrusting his arm forward, the Dark Mark clear. The minister, incredulous. Percy takes another look at his family crowding around Harry's bedside and hurries after Fudge. His family will have to see now. Of course they care for Harry, and he is just a boy, not even 15. But clearly there is danger afoot, and Harry is not safe to be around. Dumbledore clearly has Harry under his protection. He will be fine, but can the same be said for Percy's family? Harry is unstable. Dementors in Little Winging. Preposterous. Dumbledore defends him, of course, as he would defend no other student. A squib's testimony is sufficient to clear Harry from all charges. Even if there were Dementors in Little Winging, what about the clear pattern of instability and recklessness that characterized the last 4 years? Harry is a danger to Hogwarts. Percy will admit he does not particularly like Dolor's Umbridge, but at least she values order and structure. Reports from Hogwarts seem encouraging, though Harry is making a fool of himself, shouting about you-know-who without providing any real evidence. If Harry is serious about this, there are procedures to follow, ways to proceed legally. He does not even bother to interview with the Auras nor submit written testimony. Percy can only conclude that he does not have any proof and is merely trying to stir up controversy, though for what end he is not sure. He counsels Ron to stay away, to distance himself while Harry is going through this difficult time, but Ron is blinded by adolescent furor. And then, the day that changed everything. Sirius Black dead. You-know-who in the Ministry. A dawning realization. Harry had been right. But Scrimgeour is the new minister, and he is fierce and reasonable in a way that Fudge never was. Percy feels comfortable working for him, trusting him to do what needs to be done to confront this new threat. His father tells him about the Order, and he has to laugh in their faces. Trust Dumbledore when he cannot even be trusted to protect the school. Scrimgeour is a stronger man than Dumbledore will ever be. It's clear that Dumbledore has his own agenda, and Percy wants no part of it. Dumbledore, killed by Severus Snape. Snape's shock at this is enough to break them both out of the memories and back to reality. Percy is breathing hard, sweat collecting under his armpits. Snape does not look any better off, his pale face glistening with exertion. What is the meaning of this? Snape demands, looming over Percy. The audacity to dare suggest that I would ever murder Albus. I should kill you where you stand. You've guessed the truth, Professor, Percy interrupts, his head throbbing. I felt it. I know you know the truth, you just don't want to admit it. These memories are fake, Snape says darkly. Don't know what dark magic you've done to create these, but it's clear you've been planning this for a long time. Percy's shout echoes throughout the room, all the more cavernous for its store of ash instead of objects. I'm a time traveler. Snape stops abruptly. I'm a time traveler, Percy repeats a little more softly. I know that you know this. I felt you realize it. We're almost done, Professor. Snape's lips curl. A time traveler, he repeats scathingly. I know that you are in the Order, Percy says. You loved Lily Evans. You were Dumbledore's man for much of the last war and all of this one. The force of Snape's entry into his mind slams his head back into the chair. Snape rips through the next set of memories, watching as the Ministry falls, as you know who takes over, as Snape is appointed headmaster of Hogwarts. He does not linger on Percy's feelings of guilt or his agonizing over whether to admit to his family that he was wrong or continue where he is. He does not hesitate when Percy is appointed as a scribe for the Muggle-born trials, nor when Percy hears that Ron has broken into Gringotts. He blazes past Fred's death without a blink. He stops only when Harry Potter catches the Dark Lord's wand and watches him keel over into the dust. They watch the memory together silently. Sensing Snape's shock, Percy takes control gently. He shows Snape his guilt over Fred's death, the way that it eats at him for the next year. He reveals his conversation with Harry. Horcruxes, to split a soul. His resolve, he will do it again and make it right. He will end the Dark Lord before he can touch a single member of Percy's family. He will make it up to Fred, to Ron, to Harry. Percy does not show Snape much of the second timeline, focusing only on his decision to write to Tom in an attempt to find the other Horcruxes. He shows the chamber from his perspective, his resolve. He will find the Horcruxes, and he will protect his siblings. He skirts over the diadem and ends with the memory of himself waking up in the room, Snape overhead. And then, slowly, he expels Snape from his mind and waits for whatever comes next. Snape stares at him for a very long time. Percy is used to his long silences, but this one is nearly longer than he can endure. He shifts, uncomfortable in the cold embrace of thick and heavy ropes. Despite what his brothers may think, Percy does not enjoy reviewing his performance on tests after the fact. Interviews, exams, public speaking. He will prepare for them as much as possible, perform them as calmly and competently as he can. And then, immediately upon their termination, sink into the sweet relief that accompanies finishing an anxiety-inducing task. Percy is not one for organized religion, but he imagines that if believing in a creator provides anything close to the limp bonelessness of knowing what's done is done, and the result is out of one's hands, well, he can see the appeal. Thus, he allows himself to lean back into the exaltation of having finally shared his burden, and allows his eyes to roam the room while Snape thinks. He sees the diadem to his left, hidden slightly under his book bag. The Grey Lady, he postulates, exerting what little influence she can over the physical world. He begins breathing slowly and calmly, forcing his racing heart to settle. The trick to calmly awaiting results is to have faith in one's ability to meet the next curve in the road. If he prepares for tests and maintains a good average in a class, performing poorly on one exam is a setback merely than a failure. If he does not lie during an interview, actually being expected to complete a job is a challenge to conquer rather than dread. Percy does not know exactly how Snape will react, but he is secure in his knowledge that he has told the truth and not left additional traps to fall into later. Then Snape levels his wand directly at Percy's heart. Percy tenses instantly. "I may have to kill you," Snape says, and if Percy is not mistaken, his tone contains a hint of regret. "I trust you will understand why." "I very much do not understand why," protests Percy. Snape looks at him evenly. "I have seen your memories. I know what the future holds. You know who I am, or you know something of it. Do you really believe that I would risk seeing his defeat merely to save my own life?" Percy opens his mouth and then shuts it again. Yes, he can see the logic in what Snape proposes, except killing me would definitely change the timeline. "I believe part of your motivation for returning is that you are not instrumental in his death," Snape says, rather insightfully. Percy scowls. "I cannot risk that your artless machinations will tilt the balance away from victory." Percy actually contemplates this, but he eventually shakes his head. "We can destroy the Horcruxes, Professor. We can end him before anyone has to die." "I can destroy the Horcruxes," Snape corrects. "I hardly need the assistance of a 17-year-old boy." Pause in which Percy snorts, insulted despite himself. "Then, however, you are correct. Your death may impact the timeline unduly. There are other ways to render you immobile." Percy knows instantly what he means. "I won't tell you what I've hidden," he says instantly. "You'll have to rip it out of my mind. Notes I've saved, plans I've set into motion. If you obliviate me, I will eventually find something." "I could make you talk," Snape says, and the dark edge to his tone sends shivers down Percy's spine. A second later, Snape's voice is thoughtful. "But perhaps there is an advantage to your aid." "I would hope you would be aiding me," Percy insists, affronted, hoping the Veritaserum will make his voice ring with truth. Snape rolls his eyes. "You could not survive one battle with the Dark Lord. What makes you think you could navigate an entire war?" Percy gathers all of his strength and focuses his wandless magic on his binds. With a sizzle, they fall away. He enjoys the look of surprise on Snape's face, but knows he can never bank on Snape failing to ward his ropes against wandless magic again. "Partners, then. I am not very much younger than you, Professor Severus, no matter how I may seem in this body. Believe it or not, I'm 30 years old." He tries to convey this maturity to Snape as he stands, hoping against reason he did not show the flutter of discomfort when he dared say Severus. "One wonders whether repeating adolescence ought to count in the tally," Snape comments dryly, but he lowers his wand. Percy grins, relief flooding his body. "It certainly is not fun." "Partners, then. Stranger things have happened." "You cannot," Percy chokes on the words, the potion refusing to allow him to say what he'd planned. "I do not want you to tell Dumbledore." "Yes," Snape agrees simply. Percy blinks, having expected more of a fight, and Snape raises an eyebrow. "Albus would never be capable of the patience required to leave the timeline intact. The ghost knows," Percy nods, "and you can't obliviate her or kill her." "Indeed, though there are ways to send ghosts to their demise," Snape says darkly. He continues to look at Percy. "Why were you here tonight?" Percy points to the diary, and then, after a prolonged second, nudges the diadem out from under his book bag. Snape inhales sharply, and Percy hurries to explain. "It is another Horcrux. Tom, he sensed it, possessed me. I think he tried to destroy it. I don't know if he succeeded. The last thing I remember is fiendfire." Snape reaches into his robes for his dragon-hide gloves and then lifts the diadem gingerly. He examines it visually from all angles, his eyes wide. "Remarkable," he breathes. "You knew it was the diadem." "The Grey Lady tasked me to find it," Percy says truthfully. "I did not know it was a Horcrux. I never would have. I couldn't have imagined." "Yes, the thought of perverting such an artifact is unthinkable," Snape muses, continuing to examine the diadem. "You believed it would bring you wisdom," Percy flushes. "The Grey Lady tasked me to find it," he repeats again weakly. The Veritaserum hums around his tongue, but does not force him to answer the question. Snape looks up from the diadem to give him a derisive look. "Indeed," he says before secreting the diadem away in one of his many pockets. "We shall have to examine it further. I am not too familiar with Horcruxes or how to detect one. The diary, I assume." Percy nods slowly, unable to entirely prevent his instinctive reach for it. He feels a personal kinship to it, particularly after his experience with Tom's possession, feeling as though his self merged with Tom's broken soul. "I do not know if this has been destroyed, either. Tom may be exhausted." Snape peers at him closely. "You hope he is not destroyed. If he is destroyed, our hopes for finding the rest of the Horcruxes are destroyed with him," Percy deflects, irritated that he is so transparent. He does not know what he hopes for, but he can admit that part of him wants Tom to spring back under his quill so that they may continue plotting together. "He told you nothing else?" "Well, he said there were 6, Percy recounts unwillingly, "to make 7 splits of the soul." He was not sure what the others would be, merely that they would be important to him. Other Founders' artifacts, perhaps. Percy opens his mouth to tell of his research into Hufflepuff's cup or Slytherin's various amulets, and then hesitates. He still has not abandoned the idea of using them as aid, and how unlikely is it that Tom would have found and corrupted more than one sacred artifact? The sorting hat must be pristine, otherwise someone would have discovered it by now. He likely only used the diadem because it was accessible. Perhaps, Percy hedges instead. Truthful, truthful, truthful. He is nothing but truthful. He was descended from Slytherin, you know. "I did know," Snape says softly, some memory private to him passing through his mind. A second later, the man shakes his head and turns, casting a practiced eye at the devastation around them. "Detention, Mr. Weasley. Every week for the rest of the term, and likely most of the next." "Tutelage, please, Professor," Percy says instantly. "Detentions go on your record. 30 and still worried about your record, are we?" Snape says, rolling his eyes. "If I survive this war, I'll be trapped here forever, Professor," Percy responds, injured. "Why would I deliberately sabotage my future?" Snape gives him a piercing look. "So you cannot return?" "No." Percy licks his dry lips and then adds, "In truth, I do not know if the timeline I left still exists, or whether I destroyed it," completes Snape. He too hesitates before his next words. "You felt the death of your brother was sufficient motivation for you to leave your timeline and never return." Percy's first reaction is outrage, mingled with shame, as if Snape's words cast aspersions on Percy's entire existence for the last 7 years. And then he forces himself not to react, and instead to answer honestly. "I believe my brother's death was the impetus for my actions, but my motivation was my own shame, my guilt, my complicity, even." Admitting this is less painful than it would have been a few years ago, but nevertheless, Percy cannot resist flicking his gaze toward the floor, unable to meet Snape's eyes as he admits this. "My selfishness is not without value," he reminds himself forcibly, though the words ring less true than they have in the past. "And now," Snape says with a curious intensity, "do you feel as though your guilt has been absolved?" Percy, for all of his insistence on logic and reason and critical thinking, answers this question by considering it, and then assessing whether he feels sick to his stomach. "Not yet," he replies slowly, and he is unsurprised to learn that the Veritaserum agrees with him. "But I feel as though it will when I am finished with my task. Whether this is the correct answer or not remains a mystery." Percy watches as Snape comes to some private decision and then nods to himself. "Why did you say nothing? You have had 7 years in this world, if your story is to be believed. You did not feel it wise to inform another, the headmaster, your parents, your precious Professor McGonagall." "I told Myrtle," Percy points out. "Ah, yes, a ghost." "The most useful of compatriots," Snape drawls sarcastically. "Am I to believe you kept silent so that you may secure your own glory?" Percy begins to speak, to defend himself, but falters. The immensity of explaining himself, the terrible isolation and sense of urgency, his conviction that he must not change the timeline unduly. Your first instinct was to kill me or obliviate me, he says finally, though aware of the inadequacy of his response. I do not think Dumbledore would have even hesitated. Professor, though you may believe otherwise, I did not embark on this task for my own glory. I considered asking for help multiple times, but I could not risk it. Snape considers this quietly. What goes unsaid between them is that any alternate road Percy could have taken would have led directly to Dumbledore, eventually. And me? Snape asks, his voice low. You said you are, aware of my role in this drama. Percy waits, but Snape does not seem to bring himself to ask the next question. Percy answers it anyway. I thought you were not interested in my mediocrity. Back on common ground, Snape raises a mocking eyebrow and purrs. I see that you took my comments to heart. Of course I did, Percy exclaims, his cheeks flushing crimson. Did you think your regard was not important to me? He stops, chest heaving, wishing abruptly that he could sink through the floor and disappear. You are treading down a dangerous path, Snape says coldly. It would serve you well if everyone whose attention you have attracted thinks as little of you as I. Well, I thank you not to admonish me for keeping my secret private, Percy responds testily. I believe the Dark Lord must return in corporeal form before anyone may hope to destroy him, which, if the timeline remains unchanged, will occur in over 18 months' time. I'm interested to hear what you think I ought to have done instead. Had you told me years ago, we could be more ready. And how, might I ask, should I have determined you would be a trustworthy partner? Percy snaps back. We did not speak often in the previous timeline. I have only Harry's word that you are not the Death Eater you appeared to be. And in this timeline, did you believe I gave every student the attention I deigned to spare on you? And we return once again to the fact that you tired of me, Snape. Percy barks out a laugh and shakes his head. There are many things I would do differently if I went through this charade of a life for a third time, and many things I hope to do differently with the time I have left. But I know what it's like to not be respected, and I will not purposefully put myself through that unless it is necessary to achieve my goals. I sought you out to learn from you, and I tried to be as honest with you as I could. Percy hesitates, but when Snape does not say anything, he continues, feeling his heart beat combatively in his throat. I am, I admit, relieved you have found out my secret. I will provide you with notes from the previous timeline, as well as my research on Horcruxes, and I hope together we can find a way to defeat the Dark Lord. I will not stand in your way, nor lie, nor try and obliviate you. But I will not be your partner if you do not respect me enough to treat me as an equal. Snape watches him quietly and then turns to open the door. You ought to be examined by Madame Pomfrey, is all that he says. I need to think more of what I have learned tonight. Percy spends the night in the hospital wing, ostensibly for magical exhaustion, which is embarrassing for a wizard of his age and caliber, though it allows him to avoid the questioning eyes of his housemates for the evening. He also finds a small measure of comfort in the dark, silent hospital wing, with its rows of empty beds and bobbing lanterns, its crisp white sheets. Madame Pomfrey offers to set up privacy hangings around his bed, but he declines. Devoid of his hangings, devoid of his bed, devoid of his own belongings, he can almost pretend that he is in the hospital wing for magical exhaustion, and that he has left the diary in his bedroom rather than risk exposure. He can imagine that Tom is still just a quill stroke away, rather than potentially destroyed forever. Percy alternates between thinking wretchedly of the events of the night and avoiding them, like he might be unable to resist pressing on a painful bruise as it heals to monitor its progress. But as the night slips into the early hours of morning and he is still awake, he cannot prevent himself from admitting to himself that what he is feeling is sorrow. To have Tom inside of him, his magic sparking over Percy's, his thoughts jumping in Percy's head, his memories melding with Percy's own, had been incredibly intimate and incredibly exciting. And even now, Percy's own magic feels oddly bereft. To have Tom wrenched from him so abruptly, he has not seen Myrtle all evening, but he can imagine what Myrtle may say. Will you be able to kill him when you have to? He had never thought he would not have the choice. In his own way, he is relieved to have told Snape, though he imagines that adjusting to working with the other man will take some compromising on both sides. Despite the unforeseen shock of having Snape catch him in such an incriminating position, Percy finds that his mind does not want to linger on his newfound partnership with Snape. No, once he allows himself to think about Tom, he cannot stop thinking about Tom, about wondering with a heavy stomach whether he destroyed Tom or whether Tom destroyed himself. Snape does not meet his eyes during their potions class, though Percy also sits toward the back, shielding himself as best he can with a tall iron cauldron. He watches Snape as the man goes through the lesson, walking the class through the recipe chalked on the board and demonstrating the proper way to crush the soporiferous beans to best produce liquid. Percy does not know where he'd summoned the courage to speak so openly, and dare he say rudely, to Snape, but he does not find that he regrets it. He is relieved to have told Snape, yes, but he is very much Snape's equal, at least in age if not magical knowledge. Percy has tangled with the Dark Lord, has had his soul in his body, has commanded his basilisk, and faced off with his memories. He does not think it fair that he is so easily disregarded. After class, he stops by Snape's desk and hands over a neatly bound set of scrolls. He'd spent a few hours in the morning carefully transcribing the key details of the previous timeline, as well as writing a short summary of his research on Horcruxes and what he'd learned from Tom. "As discussed, sir," he says coldly but politely. "Mr. Weasley," Snape begins, but Percy smiles tightly and inclines his head. "I will await your comments if you find an area on which I did not adequately expand." Snape had kept both the diary and the diadem, which Percy does not precisely begrudge, given that if their positions were reversed, he would have done the same, and so he does not allow himself to assume that both are destroyed. Percy will give Snape until the end of term to decide whether he wants to work with Percy as equals, but he thinks he will be well within his rights to demand to see the Horcruxes whenever he chooses. During the day, he does not think of Tom, choosing instead to sit with Landon or Henry at every meal, if only to force his mind to focus on the conversation at hand rather than the last words he'd heard from Tom echoing in his mind. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday all pass similarly, though he cannot prevent his fingers from flexing around an imaginary quill at night, when he stares up at his dark red hangings and allows himself all the worry and anxiety and stress that he does not permit during daylight hours. If the diary and diadem are both destroyed, then Percy will have to proceed with the other Horcruxes. As soon as he leaves Hogwarts, he will have the freedom to investigate the Gaunt and Riddle family estates, to continue chasing after Hufflepuff's cup, and to see if he can more successfully inveigle information out of whatever seedy members of society still remember Tom Riddle. His task for the next 6 months will be to ensure that Pettigrew escapes to resurrect the Dark Lord, and to use the Hogwarts library for the last few times to take any additional notes. Given that Tom corrupted the diadem for his own purposes, Percy has to assume any of the other Founders' artifacts are a fair game, and he supposes that Hogwarts is likely to have the best collection of literature on the Founders in all of Britain. Myrtle is of the opinion that Percy should humble himself in front of Snape, which annoys Percy to no end, and so he finds himself speaking to her in clipped, irritated tones when they meet on Sunday night to discuss their next moves. "There's no need to be nasty," Myrtle sniffs when Percy snaps at her. "If you are going to claim that your task is not about your ego, then you ought to take advantage of whatever resources are available to you, regardless of how much it pains you to do so." "I gave Snape my notes," protests Percy, feeling nettled. "I wrote them down in detail and provided them to him as soon as I could. Snape is the one who does not seem interested in working with me." For Snape continues to ignore Percy, even as the weekend turns into the week, and Percy finds to some surprise that there is only 9 days before the winter holidays. "You should apologize to him," says Myrtle when they meet on Tuesday evening. "Percy, you're leaving Hogwarts. It would be nice if you were on speaking terms with the only other person that knows your secret." "For you, maybe," grouches Percy. Myrtle gives him a sideways look. "So can I speak to him?" Percy waves a hand at her, feeling uncharitable at the thought of Myrtle speaking to Snape, but unable to elucidate why. "Knock yourself out." On the following Monday, with only a few days of school remaining until the term ends, Snape calls Percy to his desk at the end of class. "I have considered your proposal," he says. a glimmer of meaning in his dark eyes that Percy feels unable to decipher. I believe it has merit, and I would like to discuss how to proceed. Have you time after your last class concludes? Percy pauses. He passes the sentence, turning it over in his mind, but to his surprise, he cannot find a hint of condescension. This, he realizes suddenly, is as close to an apology as he will likely ever get from Snape. The question is, ought he to accept it? He thinks of the look on Myrtle's face if he were to report to her that he refused Snape's olive branch and sighs heavily. Yes, he says, both to answer his question and Snape's. Can meet after supper tonight. Snape nods slowly. I will see you at my office. Percy, of course, worries incessantly throughout supper, pushing around the brown rice on his plate without much conviction. He feels like he has asserted himself. But then had he just undone his progress by allowing Snape to dictate the terms of their partnership all the same? He should be prepared to lead the session. If he allows their meetings to assume the dynamic of Snape as the professor, he'll never be able to break out of it. What is most important to cover, Horcruxes, Tom, or the timeline? Will Snape judge him if he reveals how close he became to Tom? Are you feeling ill, Percy? Henry asks him carefully. Percy gives a tremendous start and narrowly avoids flinging a green bean off the edge of his fork. Sorry, you've been a bit weird, chimes in Mariana helpfully. Is it the newts? I hear Landon is giving you quite the run for your money. Percy looks at them and notices absently that they are sitting very closely together, their shoulders touching. He wonders, for a wild second, how quickly Henry will propose to her, whether they will be married or even parents by the time that Percy has finished his lonely mission, before he can even contemplate finding another person to share his life with. It makes him feel old and incredibly weary. And if they are so intimate already, why are they sitting with him? As a chaperone, perhaps. Ought he be offended? Percy has a sudden, vivid image of how lonely his mealtimes will be in just a few months and has to repress a loud gust of a sigh. Perhaps they merely enjoy his company, he thinks to himself sardonically, though he cannot imagine he has been particularly easy to be friends with, particularly of late. Thank you for asking, he says instead. It's rather silly, I suppose. Mariana smiles cheerfully at him. Last week I had a meltdown when I couldn't cast a shielding charm non-verbally, she reveals with a wink. ID asked Henry to silence me so that I couldn't cheat, but then I couldn't get his attention either. Henry nods solemnly. I turned around and she was sobbing, he says, nudging Mariana with his shoulder. Completely silent, full-fledged tears, rather funny to be honest. Mariana snorts. Pratt. What's on your mind? Henry persists. Percy gives the tiniest of shrugs with his own shoulders, glancing automatically toward the head table before he can help himself. Snape is not there. Likely he's in his office, pacing back and forth, and building a strategy to defeat Percy and render him obsolete. It's Snape, if you can believe it. I had enlisted his help at the beginning of the year with a project, and he'd all but told me it was useless, and I was wasting his time. So I stormed off somewhat dramatically. But just now, after class, he told me that he'd reconsidered and asked me to report to his office after supper. Henny furrows his brow. That's good, though, right? Mariana gives him an exasperated glance and then turns warm eyes on Percy. I completely understand, she says with a small, conspiratorial smile. Now you're wondering how to go back to him without completely minimizing the tantrum you threw. Well, yes, Percy admits. Although I would not be so quick to use the word tantrum. Mariana winks at him. I've never understood how you work so closely with Snape. When he looks at me, I feel like I'm a flobberworm shriveling on the floor. I'm glad you stormed out, and I'm glad he asked you back. It means he must think you really have something of value in your project, Percy. I mean, he's all but eating his words. Can you imagine what it would take for Snape to do that? Percy thinks about his prickly potions professor and his secret loyalty to the ghost of Lily Evans through two terrible wizarding wars and has to concede that Mariana may have a point. So, polite but firm, he summarizes before letting out the sigh that he's been containing throughout the meal. Easier said than done. Don't lose your temper, or you'll lose all chance of winning his respect, Mariana confirms with a nod. I don't know that I agree with that, Henry objects. Sometimes I find it useful to lose my temper. Well, to assert myself a bit. Mariana gives Henry a pitying look. Because you are a rich pureblood heir, my dear, and everyone knows that you want your heirs to have some bite to them. She turns back to Percy and, widening her eyes dramatically, says, "Just pretend that you're a girl and you're facing a judgmental society, Aunt, and go from there." Far from being insulted at the comparison, Percy finds to his surprise that he is warmed by Mariana's understanding, and he even lets out a surprised huff of laughter. "Pretend that Snape is my Auntie Muriel," he says, pretending to take notes. "Got it. Thanks, Mariana." She turns back to her plate. "Show Snape what it means to be a Gryffindor, you got it. You're the only one with the nerves to tangle with him, so it's the least you can do for the house at large. Henry will give you 5 points if you make it out of the meeting alive." With Mariana's words ringing in his ears, Percy goes to Snape's office directly after supper, his head held high. He raps authoritatively on the door, and when he hears Snape's voice directing him to enter, he walks in without hesitation. An unexpected sight: Myrtle, sobbing and floating in the center of the room. "Must you?" Percy says angrily, turning on Snape, the admonition escaping him before he can remember his plan to stay polite and strong. "I fail to see why you felt this pathetic excuse for a ghost would be of any use to our operation," Snape hisses back, needing no preparation to go leap onto the offensive. "What you propose would set us against the most powerful Dark Lord of our time. We must conduct ourselves as though we are waging a war, not playing at some schoolyard mystery." "Myrtle has a right to be here," Percy says, holding out a hand to the ghost. Although how had she known to be here? She flies to his side and takes his hand, and he automatically suppresses a wince from the cold. "Her death is what started it all, and she's been helping me. She's trustworthy, and she can be useful to the operation." "There is no sense of poetic justice in the real world, Weasley," Snape replies, unmoved. "I do not care about anyone's right to be involved. Her death means nothing. He would have killed someone else if she were not there." Myrtle lifts her head and stares at him through eyes gleaming with pearly tears. "I may not have a right to be involved, but it would be a mistake to discount me," she sniffs haughtily. "Everyone overlooks ghosts. I can turn invisible, float through walls, and I can't be hurt. Only an idiot would throw that advantage away." Percy feels very proud of Myrtle right then. He squeezes her hand before remembering that she would not feel the difference. Snape breaks his gaze after a contemplative second. "Your defender already pointed out you cannot be obliviated, though I should warn you I know spells to banish you to the afterlife." Myrtle looks up eagerly. "Really?" Percy hides a grin as Snape stares at her nonplussed. He can see when Snape visibly decides to shift his attention instead to Percy. "Nobody else is to know, or I shall obliviate you myself." Percy nods curtly. "Very well, we shall proceed." Snape walks back to his desk and sits, interlocking his fingers thoughtfully. Percy takes a seat, and Myrtle hovers beside him. "How would you like to begin?" For a second, Percy is thrown by the question, having expected Snape to take the reins of the conversation and never hand them back. Then he thinks again of his conversation with Mariana and swallows, straightening his shoulders. "Well, I believe there are 3 main categories of interest: reviewing the events of the previous timeline, discussing the known Horcruxes, and charting out our next move." Snape nods thoughtfully, noting something down in a small, black, leather-bound notebook on his desk that looks uncomfortably similar to Tom Riddle's diary. "I believe our time together would be best suited to the latter 2 categories," he says. "I have reviewed the notes that you left for me in detail, and I believe we can continue to deepen our shared understanding of the intricacies of the timeline asynchronously." "I agree." Percy pauses and then offers self-consciously, "I can provide memories, though much of what I know is derived through my own research and not my participation." Snape regards Percy but does not comment, instead nodding briskly. "I conducted some research into Horcruxes since we last spoke and was able to corroborate your initial hypothesis, crude and rudimentary as it may be. Creating a Horcrux requires both an act of murder and a ritual consisting of several incantations, a potion of which I cannot find a clear description, and tremendous willpower. Somehow, the ritual harnesses the power of death to split one's soul and store it in an appointed vessel." Myrtle pipes up, her voice soft and hesitant. "The soul splits at death, we believe. That is, Percy and I have discussed it." Snape's voice is perfectly cordially, though slightly strained, when he responds, "Please." "Elaborate, miss." "Warren," Percy says, enjoying the pained look on Snape's face despite his resolve to remain mature and above small pettiness. Myrtle tells Snape what she told Percy once, that at the moment of death she was given what felt like a choice, to stay or to remain. After choosing to stay, she felt very much the same, but paler, an incomplete version of what she remembers being when alive. After a moment's hesitation, Percy pulls out the map, but they cannot find Tom Riddle's name. Unfortunately, as he explains to Snape, that is not conclusive evidence to prove either Horcrux was destroyed. The Horcruxes seem to be capable of gaining or losing strength, Percy explains. Snape looks fascinated. The sneer drops from his lips as he twists them in thought. "We will have to see if destroying them requires some sort of purification," he muses. "You think the Fiendfire did not destroy the Horcrux? There is a possibility they feed off dark magic," Snape cautions. "It bears experimentation. We must begin examining the diary and the diadem as soon as possible." Percy feels the amicable atmosphere of the last few minutes drop away. "We cannot touch the diary until Tom has told us what we need to know." Snape shakes his head. "Not be foolish, Weasley. The diary is likely destroyed, and if it is not, we cannot risk either of us being taken in by the Horcrux. We do not know how the Fiendfire changed it, but we have no way of learning what else would be a Horcrux," he insists, leaning forward. "Would you have thought the first one he made would be his schoolboy diary? We cannot go forward on mere conjecture." Snape is unmoved. "Even if I believed the diary were still active, the risk of possession is too great," he counters. "Also, we have no guarantee he would be able to tell us what he needs to know, or that he even succeeded in making 7. Percy thinks back to that conversation he had with Harry so long ago now. "He succeeded," he says firmly. Snape allows himself a sigh. "I would venture to guess the same. More so than 3 or 13, Myrtle ventures." "I believe so," Snape answers her. He seems to have decided to treat Myrtle like he would a student. His voice is far more neutral and reserved than when he's viciously insulting Percy. "I believe he would have made 3 and felt no real adverse side effects. Why stop there? After he reaches 7, however, it's likely he could not go further. To split a soul 7 times already pushes the boundary of rationality. I think we need to try and awaken Tom. Myrtle is the one to protest this time. Percy, it's too risky." "If the timeline remains the same, then we have just under 18 months until he returns," Percy protests. "And I'm not sure we should destroy any more of the Horcruxes until that day. We need to be ready to move quickly after his return, and Tom is our best lead." Snape considers this. "Your idea is not without merit." While Percy is reeling from the shock of being complimented, or at least validated by Snape, the other man continues crisply, "Under 3 conditions. The first, you must check in with me twice a day, leaving the diary with either the ghost or I. We will agree on a password for the following meeting. If you fail to meet with us, we will end the experiment immediately." "Reasonable." Percy nods mutely. "The second is that you shall leave with me this map," Snape says. "If you do fail to check in, I need to be able to find you instantly." "I need it," Percy protests. "For what sneaking around? If you cannot conduct yourself with stealth without the crutch of a map, you ought to focus on remedying that immediately." "Fine," he acquiesces grumpily. "And the last." Snape's attention feels uncomfortably like that of the basilisk, intense and technically harmless, until it isn't. "I do not imagine that you have told me everything. You must set aside a selection of memories and notes for me regarding any initiatives that you may be pursuing privately. Imagine that the diary kills you or forces us to obliviate you. You must make it so that we are able to succeed in this without you." Percy gulps, but he can see the logic in what Snape is saying. "Fine, but you shan't look at it until it becomes necessary. I won't have you killing me because you think I am irrelevant." "Agreed," Snape says smoothly. "Come before breakfast and after supper every day. The first password shall be the name of that insipid proposal you submitted to Minerva." Percy uses all of his self-control not to react. Snape is just needling him, and he won't give him the satisfaction of responding predictably. "Agreed," he says. "Shall we begin?" Percy knows an impressive number of spells to examine living and inert objects, to assess their magical properties, to diagnose recent magical activity. and to unearth any hidden traps or wards. Snape, as it turns out, knows even more. Between the two of them, it takes nearly the entire evening to exhaust their shared knowledge of these spells, only for Snape to conclude rather definitively that the diary is just that: old pieces of parchment, bound by twine and leather. Fiendfire must destroy a Horcrux, Snape muses, ignoring Percy's muttered disagreement with ease. The question remains, was the diadem similarly afflicted, and if so, why not? But Tom, through me, cast the Fiendfire, insists Percy for the third or fourth time. Why would the spell destroy the diary? Dark magic is not easily controlled, says Snape silkily. Or have you already forgotten our discussion? Percy thinks of the flames forming the great head of the basilisk, fire dancing around the crown of its head, and the feeling of dark, oppressive magic that rose in its wake. But the diary was not burnt. Perhaps Tom exhausted himself. Myrtle pipes up. Percy starts. Myrtle has been uncharacteristically silent over the past few hours, watching as Snape and Percy tried their hands at magic. What powers are Horcrux? You may as well ask what powers a person, snaps back Percy, though he regrets it, a second later, when Myrtle gives him a look of betrayal. He sighs, using one hand to pinch the bridge of his nose under his glasses. All I meant to say was, if a Horcrux is part of a soul, magical exhaustion does not kill a person, it merely exhausts them. Snape leans forward, looking at the diary with renewed interest. But using dark spells can harm the soul, he says musingly. I imagine you have not forgotten that part of our little talk, have you, Mr. Weasley? Percy, he insists, a cold feeling forming in the pit of his stomach. He can see what Snape and Myrtle are implying. If it is true that to use dark spells harms the soul indelibly, rips it, tears it, frays it at its ends, then perhaps it is true that Tom took it too far with the burst of fiendfire and tore himself into irretrievable pieces. But from one spell, consider the diary, Snape says. Consider Tom. If he were capable of using dark spells, do you not think he would have long ago utilized that skill? He may have grown arrogant. Your magical core is strong, but your capacity for dark magic is not, regardless of what you may believe you are accomplishing with your little spells and rituals that you pretend not to engage in. You say that you fought against his desire to use fiendfire. He would have exerted himself greatly in trying to assert his will against yours. And dark magic is magic of wills, says Percy reluctantly. So by fighting with him, you may have forced his hand. Snape leans back in his chair and gives Percy an inscrutable look from under his surprisingly long lashes. I would congratulate you if it were not clear that you are not pleased by this news. It is not that Percy misses Tom or regrets fighting against his desire to use fiendfire, no matter what Snape may be implying in those long, meaningful looks. Percy thinks about it several hours later, after their impromptu session on the diary was broken up by a combination of irritability and exhaustion, and the great clock chiming for curfew, wrapped tightly in his blankets in the protection of his bed. He regrets that if he were the cause of Tom's demise, that he had not known that was something he could have achieved, that he failed to reason with Tom just at the moment most critical for him to try. But Percy cannot truly believe that Tom would have exhausted himself with a spell as simple as fiendfire. He supposes fiendfire is quite complicated. It is one of the few ways to magically destroy an object beyond repair, which is a task far more difficult than it may immediately seem, given the general resilience of magic. But even a sliver of Tom Riddle's soul would be capable of extreme feats of dark magic. How could one single spell rid the world so quickly of Tom? Percy simply cannot wrap his head around the truth, and so, despite Myrtle and Snape's convictions to the contrary, he stubbornly continues to insist that the diary is not yet destroyed, and Tom is not yet lost to them forever. The next morning, when he goes to check in with Snape after a light breakfast, nothing seems to be sitting well in his stomach, even though Mariana pushes the steaming bowl of oatmeal toward him optimistically. The other man is pacing back and forth. Sirius Black is innocent. Snape asks without preamble. Percy blinks. Yes, didn't we cover that? Snape motions irritatedly to the map, which Percy belatedly realizes is spread over his desk. And you are sure he did not work together with Pettigrew? If he did, he was quite the liar, Percy says doubtfully. He had never spoken to Sirius Black in the original timeline, but he had housed the Order safely, as far as Percy was aware, and certainly Harry had spoken of him like he was the paragon of Gryffindor honor and virtue. Snape hisses a bitter laugh. Sirius Black is many things. Lying is but the least of his crimes. He wasn't working with Pettigrew. I'm fairly sure of that, Percy insists. He knows Pettigrew died somehow in the war, but he does not know the details. He thought it fairly irrelevant at the time. He knows that Pettigrew flees at the end of the year and somehow is responsible for resurrecting the Dark Lord. This much Scrimgeour had gleaned from Fudge or Dumbledore and passed down to Percy in private. Though the official ministry stance on Sirius Black had not changed throughout the war, Black providing a convenient scapegoat for both sides. And you did not yet turn Pettigrew in, Snape muses, barely listening. We need him to ensure the Dark Lord returns, but how do we know he will act as he did before? How do we prevent the rat from fleeing? He knows Black is on the loose, Percy offers. Surely we can frighten him into staying close to Dumbledore until the end of the year. Yes, yes, Snape muses absently. He slows to a halt and turns on his heel to peer intently at Percy. And Black, he needs to remain alive. Percy tries fervently to pretend he doesn't know Snape is looking for the blessings to murder Sirius. He did not know Sirius very well in the last timeline, but even he knows that Snape hated the other man. Ron had described it once as loathing during the funeral that Harry had held for Sirius after the war. Yes, I believe so, he says before clearing his throat. He hopes he looks appropriately stern. Yes. Harry needs him, and I believe Dumbledore uses his ancestral house for a safe house for the Order. Snape rolls his eyes. He would, he mutters darkly. What is Black waiting for then? I believe he is trying to kill Pettigrew, but he does not know how to get at him, Percy says. The wards are rather tight, you know. He's already tried to break in, though he only really succeeded at scaring the Gryffindor boys' dormitory. They deserve a scare or two, Snape says musingly. Well, we shall have to let that continue. That's rather mature of you, Percy says dryly. Snape gives him a smirk. In addition to my own personal enjoyment, we mustn't tip our hand. If we make it too difficult for him, he may run off and ruin the timeline further. We must keep an eye on Pettigrew, though. Can't have him running off too early either. What happens when it all comes to a head? That fiasco he had remembered all too well. The minister had arrived at Hogwarts to execute the hippogriff that injured Draco. Black had been captured and scheduled for the Dementors, and then had implausibly vanished. Percy has a suspicion that Pettigrew had been involved, though he had admitted to Snape last night that he was not entirely sure. Just what I had said last night. Somehow Sirius Black is captured, and Fudge comes to Hogwarts to take him back to Azkaban. There is some altercation that lands Ron in the hospital wing, and then Black disappears. Then Ron comes home that Summer insisting Sirius Black is innocent and Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew. How did your parents take that? Snape is definitely smiling now, that their 13-year-old son cared for a 30-year-old man. They were mostly furious with Dumbledore, as I recall, Percy says. There were lots of flu calls that summer between his parents and Dumbledore, though now he belatedly realizes that Dumbledore may have begun reforming the Order. His parents had confirmed that Scabbers was Pettigrew in private to Percy, but they had not seemed nearly as concerned that Percy had cared for a Death Eater for a number of years. Percy does not know whether their worry for Ron was due to Ron's age or his proximity to Harry, but either way, he still feels as though they should have been more worried for him. And Pettigrew. All that Scrimgeour told me was that Pettigrew was responsible for resurrecting the Dark Lord, Percy repeats. I believe that Dumbledore had told Fudge, and Fudge had told Scrimgeour, since I do not think Dumbledore and Scrimgeour spoke very often. Snape nods thoughtfully. I might have some theories. Well, I am both heartened and disappointed to see you have failed to wake the Dark Lord for another evening. Tonight, we shall meet at 9:17 exactly, and the password shall be the grade you expect to receive on today's exam. But there is no exam in potions today. Percy may be a full-grown man himself, but Snape's dark look of amusement will always send shivers down his spine. Isn't there? A few days later, Percy notices Harry sneaking past him with his cloak. Someone should tell him that his trainers occasionally peek out the bottom, presumably to Hogsmeade. Percy figures he ought to head off Snape before the other man discovers his nemesis is openly flouting the rules and stops into his office before lunch. To his utter surprise, Myrtle is already there. From the books spread over the floor, Percy surmises Snape is once again trying to determine what precisely ghosts mean by a split at death. The other man is trying to reverse construct the ritual that must be required for the creation of the Horcrux. Percy finds the subject interesting, but he can admit privately he does not necessarily have the grasp of advanced potions theory required to find it so gripping. It serves instead to make him feel reconciled to his choice of including Snape. "You all look busy," Percy says to announce himself. Snape barely looks up. "Some of us are capable of sustained concentration, yes." Myrtle giggles. Percy does not like a friendship with Snape, two less compatible people he can barely imagine. That, and he already can foresee that they will gang up on him. "What are you researching?" Snape pins him with a poisonous glare. "One wonders why you try to understand anything at all." "Begone, Mr. Weasley. Go to Hogsmeade like the rest of your insipid peers. It has not escaped my attention Mr. Potter is on his way right now." "Well, fine. If they do not need Percy here, he will not bother to stay. He has his own plans to pursue." "This serves as my check-in with both of you," Percy says. He holds out the diary, which he faithfully relinquishes to Myrtle each night, though Tom still has not awoken from whatever stasis binds him. "Tomorrow morning we shall meet at 6:19 a.m., and the password shall be the portrait Sirius Black attacked." Snape summons the diary and examines it. "I shall take the night to analyze this," he muses. Percy responds immediately. "Do not write in it. Jealous I may usurp you in the eyes of the Dark Lord." Snape drawls. "I am surprised he has not yet tired of you. By now I expect you have found the location of all 5 remaining Horcruxes. Or wait, he's not responding to you, is he?" Percy glowers blackly at him. Myrtle does not help by swooping to Percy's side and saying eagerly, "Do you think he is ignoring you?" "I haven't been able to ask, Myrtle." "Subtlety, thy name is Percy Weasley," Snape says, turning his attention back to the diary. "If we can somehow measure the amount of soul, a ridiculous proposition, but perhaps—" "It only showed up on the map after it possessed Percy," Myrtle chimes in, looking over Snape's shoulder. "We know that the fact that neither this nor the diadem appear on the map does not necessarily imply they are destroyed," Snape muses. "We shall have to devise another test." "How are you planning to find the other Horcrux locations, then?" Percy says combatively. Snape's earlier comment still smarts. Snape raises an unimpressed eyebrow at Percy's outburst. "Logic," he says easily. "Who had this in his possession? Lucius Malfoy. Who else might the Dark Lord have trusted as such?" Percy thinks about this. His main followers in school were not, and Malfoy, the elder Malfoy, that is, Dresden Greengrass, the Parkinson boy, the elder Black. "Nearly all of them are dead," Snape says shortly. "I posit Yaxley, Lestrain, and yes, perhaps not." "But he wouldn't have given all of his Horcruxes over," Percy protests. "He's far too clever for that. I think he would put them in places of importance, places of meaning. Tom likes symbolism." "And the symbolism of Lucius Malfoy," Snape says skeptically. Myrtle watches their back and forth, eyes wide. "Tom favored Abraxas," Percy says. "He was very beautiful, very charming, the rich and perfect heir Tom always longed to be." Snape snorts dismissively. "I doubt he chose Lucius because he reminded him of an attractive peer." "No, I think he gave it to Abraxas," Percy protests. He's thinking of the memories Tom has shown him, the way Tom watches Abraxas with guarded envy, how Tom pretended to be a pureblood to Percy. Abraxas is what Tom wants to be, the society Tom is locked out of unless he lies. Giving the Horcrux to the Malfoy heir is both symbolic and ironic. Symbolic in that pureblood society is part of his soul, ironic in that Abraxas is guarding a half-blood. Not to mention the Malfoy family likely has protections. "Tom did tell everyone he was a pureblood," Myrtle chimes in. Snape does not admit Percy has made a good point, but he does not disparage it either, which Percy supposes is progress. "And where else would your beloved Tom hide a Horcrux?" "Gringotts," Percy says immediately. "I think he would enjoy concealing a Horcrux in the Wizarding Bank. Hogwarts, clearly. The orphanage where he grew up as some sort of Up yours," Myrtle says helpfully. Percy flushes crimson. "Well, yes." "You failed to mention he was raised in an orphanage," Snape hisses, making a note on a piece of parchment. "All information is vital, you Philistine. A Muggle orphanage, but he did not say where." Percy ignores the insult with practice. "So places motivated by spite," Snape muses. A perversion of places the Dark Lord felt excluded from, or places he would have enjoyed the irony of polluting. Yes, Percy agrees. He has no trouble imagining that. Snape nods to himself as if confirming something. A plausible theory, I suppose, though you would do well to remember that you spoke to a 16-year-old memory of the Dark Lord, and not the man himself. Now, come. I hope you were not intending on going to Hogsmeade. I want us to make a timeline of the next 4 years with as much detail as you can remember. Can't I just give you my notes? Percy says, for once not wanting to stay and work. He'd been looking forward to going to Hogsmeade by himself, to visiting the bookstore one last time before the holidays, to breathing some fresh air, to meeting his housemates for a pint as the day began to darken. Snape gives him a thin-lipped smile. Are we not partners? Percy rolls his eyes and drops his bag to the floor. Finally, it is time for the students to go home, though Percy is, thankfully, headed to visit his brother in Romania. He lingers after class to present Professor McGonagall with a Christmas card and some chocolates. He writes cards each year for all of his professors, even Snape, though he has never dared to give Snape anything more than a generic Happy Christmas, Professor. Certainly never chocolate. Thank you, Mr. Weasley. Tell Charles hello from me, she says warmly. I hope you have a restful holiday. You've been distracted of late. I expect you to return refreshed. Percy nods, chastised. He has been distracted of late. He hardly has thought about his research proposal. Yes, Professor. You would do well to learn about dragons while you are there, she continues. Dragon magic is curious. Dragons are considered dark creatures, yet they do not breathe cursed fire. Perhaps a dragon would destroy a Horcrux. This reminds him of another question he had been nursing, and he pauses to wait while Henrietta Thornstropple, the last straggler, finally locates her missing quill and leaves. I was wondering about locator spells, he says. Obviously, one can spell an object against basic locator spells, such as point me. Hogwarts is itself unplottable, though within the wards one can find the location of, say, a person or an office. It is very difficult to truly ward something against all locator spells, Professor McGonagall confirms, nodding. I know there is a section in your proposal about the similarities between the Fidelius charm and unbreakable vows, which both, in a way, render something more truly unplottable. Well, I was wondering, if you had something with similar magical properties as the object that is unplottable, if you could exploit their similarities to deduce where the other object is, Percy says carefully. He uses the lie he'd thought of previously. For instance, my great-aunt believes that a relative of hers unfairly laid claim to a goblin-made tiara her mother promised to her. This tiara, in addition to being goblin-made, was imbued with some additional protection spells, or something of the sort. Professor McGonagall purses her lips thoughtfully. I see where you're going with this, and I do not disagree outright, but I am not entirely sure what you would use to deduce anything about the location of the tiara. I think you would have better luck with a reactive agent instead of one congruent. Let me explain. I do not believe it is likely you could take another goblin-made tiara, enchant it with the same protection spells, and somehow scry for the original tiara. The tiara would have to have some form of sentience, I believe, for this to work. Promising. Percy nods eagerly and notes it down carefully. What you may be able to do in that scenario is go into places likely to have the original tiara, her attic perhaps, or a Gringotts vault, and try to incite a magical reaction. The tiara is spelled to protect. Try to trigger those wards. Of course, I imagine if the tiara is in a Gringotts vault, there are easier ways to ascertain if an item is in one's vault. Less promising. Percy has no intention of triggering any defense mechanisms the Horcruxes may be harboring. Thank you, Professor. He turns to go. I hope you will one day reveal what you are truly searching, Mr. Weasley, she says, her voice sharp but not unkind. I know a thread interlaces these questions and binds together your proposal. I do not need to know what it is to enjoy working with you, but I hope one day you will, nevertheless, assuage my curiosity. I will, he promises, and he means it. After coming clean to Snape, telling McGonagall would be a breeze, perhaps after Dumbledore is dead. He has supper with his family, which inevitably includes Lee, Harry, and Hermione. He is pleased to learn that Ginny has struck up a firm friendship with Demelza Robbins, who chatters away happily with the Quidditch players about her prospects for next year's tryouts. They are all rather jealous of his trip to visit Charlie and spend the meal channeling that frustration into mockery of Percy and his non-existent relationship with Tonks. Harry, Percy notices, looks morose, pushing the peas around on his plate instead of eating them. Ron and Hermione shoot him continued, worried looks. Percy was never particularly close to the trio in the last timeline, and so their dynamic interests him whenever he witnesses it. Harry is unquestionably the center of focus. It is a wonder Ron allows it without feeling insecure, and that Hermione is able to temper her ferocity to play second fiddle to Harry's various dramas. Percy sits with them in the common room after the meal, ignoring Ron's not-so-subtle signaling that he is not welcome. "Harry," he says gently, "I cannot help but notice you are upset." Harry meets his eyes guardedly and shrugs one shoulder. "Go away, Percy," Ron moans, flopping down on the large, squishy armchair. "This is private business." "He might know something," Hermione points out in a loud whisper that all three of them hear. Percy raises an eyebrow. "Indeed, the likelihood that I know something relevant is indeed high." Ron remains combative. "Don't you have any of your own friends to bother?" Percy has not had anything more than a superficial conversation with his classmates in many weeks, save for the occasional meal shared with Henry, Mariana, or even Oliver. Even Landon, whose drive to beat Percy has been replaced by the general exam urgency plaguing all of the seventh years, seems to alternate between studying silently in the library with Percy and studying silently in the library with his girlfriend. Percy ignores Ron and turns back to Harry. "If there is something I may help with, I would be happy to try," he says softly. Perhaps it is because Percy gave Harry the map. Perhaps Harry is so desperate for answers that he takes the chance to trust Percy. Either way, Harry eyes him for another second before he leans forward urgently. "Do you know what a secret keeper is?" Percy wonders who told Harry enough of the story to interest him, but not enough to fill in all of the missing information. "Black, perhaps. Is this about Sirius Black?" "You knew." Ron looks at him with as much betrayal as Harry. "And you didn't say anything." "I don't think it's a secret, Ron," Hermione says, shaking her head. "You didn't know," Percy counters. He continues training his attention on Harry. "I thought you would have been told. I'm sorry. I would have said something sooner had I known." Harry gives a short nod and crosses his arms. "I should have been told," he mumbles grumpily. "It's true, then. Sirius Black betrayed my parents." Percy is in the midst of wishing he had not said anything. "Where is Pettigrew?" He casts a wordless point me, and his wand tugs his hand toward the boys' dormitory. For good measure, he raises a ward to protect against eavesdroppers. Hermione eyes him curiously, but has the sense not to interrupt. "It would appear that way, yes," he says delicately. "Black. He never had a trial, but it is said he confessed after murdering the 13 muggles." Hermione leans forward, her eyes alight. "What do you mean, he never had a trial?" "It was a confused time," Percy says, in the uncomfortable position of excusing a system he disagrees heavily with himself. "I believe there was pressure to dispose quickly of all of the Death Eaters so that society could return to peace. Many supposed Death Eaters escaped Azkaban. Others received life sentences without a trial. So it may not have been him," Harry asks, his voice soft. Ron interjects, shaking his head. "No, mate. He killed 13 people with a single curse." If he was innocent, why would he do that? Why indeed? "The Fidelius charm entrusts a secret within the soul of another person," he explains, directing the conversation away from Black's innocence. "Generally, it is said that the secret keeper and the secret must have some sort of resonance, if you will. For instance, it would be difficult for you lot to trust Draco with a secret, even if he consented to keep the secret for you, since you have a difficult relationship. Conversely, it would be, I imagine, rather easy for one of you to hold a secret for each other." Harry's voice simultaneously has an edge and a tremble to it. "So if Sirius was trying to kill my dad, he wouldn't have been able to keep the secret." Percy shakes his head. "It is something he's wondered about. How did Pettigrew keep the secret at all? Perhaps that was part of what drove him to tell it. The spell itself may have pushed him to it. It would be more difficult, but not impossible." "And he wants to kill me," Harry says flatly. "Why can't they make me a secret? It's a good idea, actually. Percy stores it for later. What can be kept or not kept a secret? A location, for sure, but a person, What about knowledge, a memory, a spell? I suggest you all read into it, Percy deflects. Harry, I know you have been warned against confronting Black, and I won't tell you something you already know, but I really must add, innocent or not, he spent 12 years in prison. We don't know why he's broken out, or what he's after. It very well may be you. Perhaps he does not want to kill you. Maybe he feels that he must kidnap you and keep you safe in that way. Perhaps he wants to use you for bargaining power with the minister to secure his freedom, or he does want to kill you. 12 years with the Dementors would not be kind to anyone, innocent or otherwise. I really must insist that you three stay together and stay on your guard. They all nod solemnly, even Ron. To wit, I will teach you the spell I am using now. It is a mild notice me not. Eavesdroppers trying to focus on our conversation will find their attention directed elsewhere. It will not work for someone intently trying to eavesdrop, but for casual use, it will suffice. You may find it in Protective Magics, Chapter 5. Please feel free to find me if you struggle with its casting. Hermione looks positively gleeful. Percy hopes she learns some of the other spells in Protective Magics and teaches them to the other two. Merlin knows they'll need them. The 3 days at home are awkward. Percy and his mother have an explosive, screaming fight about family pride that, in all truth, goes much the same as the first time around. The difference is that this time Arthur stays largely absent, as it is Molly's family at the center of the argument instead of Arthur's job. His weekend with Aunt Muriel is, as always, a relief. He tunes out her comments about half-bloods with practice, and they spend an enjoyable afternoon cataloging some of the artifacts in the Prowett vault. She has a veritable wealth of stories, which Percy hopes to share with his siblings one day. Finally, it is time for him to leave the country. The flu to Romania is disorienting, easily the longest flu Percy has ever been on. Tonks, predictably, tips forward directly to the floor. Percy wobbles but remains on his feet, his stomach roiling uncomfortably. Well, you two are a pretty pair, says Charlie laughingly from a few steps away. Percy and Tonks get to their feet, shakily gather their things from the board attendants and cross over to Charlie. He greets them with broad hugs, and Percy winces when he claps him heavily on the back. Charles, Tonks says delightedly. Let's get to what is important. Where's the man, then? Charlie's ears flush a gentle red. I thought I would show you around the city a bit first, Nymphadora. Tonks loops her arm around Charlie. Percy follows a heartbeat behind, feeling a little out of place in the face of their easy familiarity. Can't he come? He's on shift, Charlie explains, rolling his eyes. You have plenty of time to ogle him. Now I'll apparate you to the reservation, and we'll drop off your things. The reservation is exactly like Percy had imagined, and Charlie had described in many a letter. Wide, grassy hills with singed patches, lending to the appearance of an elderly man with bald spots. Small buildings with slanted roofs, made entirely out of some dark, shimmery metal. Young men and women running around purposefully, some in the dark green that Charlie is wearing, others in orange, and a small number in blue, and dragons blotting out the sky. Percy cannot help but stare, his mouth open in what is undoubtedly an unsightly manner. There are dragons of every size and color, and every few seconds there is a hiss of fire or a screech of claws. How are they just flying around? Percy stammers, tracking a small, vicious-looking dragon that is sporting a horned head that is uncomfortably reminiscent of a basilisk. Did you think they'd all be in cages or on a leash? Charlie says, chuckling. He grabs Percy's bag and takes it into the cabin, ducking back out a second later. Well, yes, Percy admits. Tonks is similarly enthralled, her eyes alight. Her hair is spiky and tipped with brilliant orange. This is wicked, very complex wards, Charlie explains. He traces an outline in the air. See there, that copse of trees that supply shed that steam. Those are some of the boundaries of the wards. Percy nods after another second of watching the dragon's wheel in the sky. Yes, none of them pass the boundaries. How? Containing a dragon ought to be impossible. Dragons are dark creatures largely due to their inherent wildness. They could not be tamed nor controlled by anything but the cruelest measures. Old magic, Charlie explains with a shrug. Elemental magic, I'd guess. It's why we aren't able to move the reservation, just add to it. The words are tied to something, the land, perhaps. I really couldn't say, but my boss would be able to tell you more. They drop the topic for now, but Percy keeps watching the dragons snort fire at each other and trace complicated patterns across the sky. There is still much to magic he still does not know. Percy finds to his surprise that he quite likes Daniel, Charlie's chosen partner. Not boyfriend. Charlie huffs in disgust when Tonks needles him about it. Boyfriend makes me think we're 16 and sneaking off to the shrieking shack. Tonks' wicked reply had made them all go red together. Percy has no intention of thinking of his brother shrieking, "Thank you very much." Daniel is Muggle-born, English, but educated in Romania. He speaks 7 different languages. Percy is rather jealous and enjoys teasing Charlie about his uncultured upbringing. Charlie, far from being insulted about the ramshackle of the English countryside, takes pleasure in ribbing Daniel about his posh background. Tonks and Percy discuss it later, laying side by side on 2 magically inflated mattresses in the cramped main room of the cabin Daniel and Charlie share with 2 other rangers. He wonders whether Tonks would be jealous that Charlie has so clearly moved on, but she seems happy, gushing over Daniel's dark curls and straight chin, the way he crinkles his brown eyes when he watches Charlie talk. "What about you?" Percy finally asks her. "Any blokes at the Auror Academy?" Tonks snorts and shakes her head. "I don't know a single Auror that would date another," she says. "I'd wondered at first. I mean, we all share a dorm, boys and girls, showers, locker rooms, what have you. I wondered why they were so unconcerned. But there's absolutely no hanky-panky. Something about the fact that we see each other every day covered in sweat and blood and tears, and not in a sexy way, you know. I can't imagine sleeping with any of them. Disappointing, since some of the lads are real fit." Percy chuckles and lays back, adjusting the thin pillow. Well, her future husband is back at Hogwarts, looking thinner and more gaunt every day. "I have a feeling you'll find your partner in the most unexpected place," he says. "I hope so," she says. "Like when you flew somewhere, and instead of crashing on the floor, you fall straight into a handsome stranger's arms. That's my current plan." "Ah, I'd wondered why you spent so much energy falling out of flues and tripping over doorways. Waiting for someone to catch you." Prat. Comfortable silence. Percy finds his attention turning back to the dragons, to their unconscious grace. The next day, he asks the warden eagerly about the containment spell for the dragons. It's linked to the land, as Charlie had mentioned. Elemental theory, perhaps. He makes a mental note to ask Professor McGonagall. Notably, though dragons are undeniably dark, the spell is not considered light. Similarly, though dragons are creatures of fire, controlling them does not require water. The trainers corral the dragons by methods familiar to all that have worked with wild animals, incentives and punishments. There are few spells that can pierce a dragon's hide, but the ones that do work are well known to all of the trainers. Magical cages and ropes, meat laced with sedative, and positive reinforcement are just some of the tools that Percy observes the trainers using throughout his time there. He's been thinking about it wrong, he realizes with a sigh. Dark magic does not negate light magic, not necessarily. He will have to revisit his knowledge of elemental theory. Scrying is a magic of water. Perhaps he can use it to discern the Horcrux. January 1994, after the warm companionship of the last few weeks, the drafty isolation of Hogwarts bears a noticeable chill. Percy returns listlessly to his classes, listening mutely to his yearmates chatter about their future plans. Professor McGonagall has not pushed him to make a decision, but he feels her watching him, waiting. He has a letter, sealed and ready to be sent, sitting on his bedside table. It is addressed to one Mr. Crouch, and it contains Percy's application for his assistant position. Percy is fairly confident he will get the job. He included a brief summary of the relevant cauldron regulation that he painstakingly memorized all those years ago. Landon is off to the ministry as well, hoping to become an unspeakable. Oliver is playing reserve. Mariana intends to travel. Henry will work with his father. Penny is going to America, to university. Sonali will be studying in India, staying with the outer branch of her family, much to Landon's chagrin. Percy had pointed out that Landon can afford the international portkeys, but Landon had said that was not the point. Somehow all of his peers have plans, even frivolous. Sometimes he feels like the only one without direction. He's nearly finished cleaning the room of hidden things, trying to salvage any artifacts that survived the fire. Myrtle finds him one day toward the end of January, patiently casting diagnostic spells on a pouch of silver coins that melted together, designation unknown. "We've not spent too much time together recently," she says hesitantly to announce herself. Percy looks up and greets her before returning to the task at hand. I'm surprised at how well you and Snape are able to work together. Myrtle tries to look nonchalant, but Percy knows the compliment pleases her. Thank you, she says. I'm glad you included me. Merlin, I'm glad you talked to me all those years ago. My life, my death, I suppose, has changed so much since that day. She hesitates and watches him sweep the coins back into the pouch. I don't want you to banish me when you leave Hogwarts. Percy has, honestly, completely forgotten about that promise. He squints up at her. Why not? I have something to do now, Myrtle explains. It's as if this was the reason I became a ghost. Tom Riddle killed me, and I am going to help kill them. Maybe that will free me. Anthony says there are reports of ghosts disappearing once their task is done. Percy has never particularly subscribed to that point of view, but he nods regardless. I'm proud of you, then. He peers at her sideways and says, Did you do something? Sorry. Did you talk to Snape? It is something he's been wondering for a while, though not something he had felt comfortable enough to ask until the other side of the relaxing winter holidays. What do you mean? Percy gives her a look. Did you talk to Snape and tell him to work with me? No, says Myrtle. Percy narrows his eyes at her but cannot tell if she is lying. How did you know to be there that night? The first day, when I met Snape after supper. I didn't tell you that he'd spoken to me. Myrtle flushes, her cheeks turning a smoky grey. I didn't tell him to work with you, she says reluctantly. I just mentioned that you had told me the secret too, and I felt that it was stupid of us not to pool our resources. I may have shouted at him a bit, to be honest. Percy wants to be upset at her, but he can't really find it in him. Myrtle has always been too nosy and interfering for her own good. He supposes that this time it has been for his own good as well. They fall into silence as he finishes this quadrant and moves on to the next, beginning with a large oak cabinet that is still smoking slightly, though it has been many weeks now. It is an odd feeling to have his mission taken up by two others. Myrtle may feel charged with purpose, but Percy feels rather the opposite. He supposes he should be happy he can relax, but some part of him feels jealous that he has so quickly been rendered useless. It is as if his own special quality was his advanced notice, and now that he has carefully transcribed his timeline for Snape, the other man hardly speaks to him. Percy had imagined a partnership of equals, feats of magic, maybe espionage. Not this. January is cold and biting, made all the chillier from the continued silence from the diary. Snape has not said anything, but Percy can tell that both he and Myrtle think Percy's insistence on trying to reawaken Tom is pathetic at best, dangerous at worst. Percy watches Sirius and Pettigrew circle each other on the map, but Tom is nowhere to be found. And yet, Percy stubbornly refuses to admit that Tom has destroyed himself. Snape and Myrtle both disagree. After all, Percy's last memory is of Tom casting fiendfire at his Horcrux. Percy had tried to deflect the spell, but it had been destructive enough to devour the entire room. Aim is hardly the most important consideration for fiendfire. In his free time, Percy begins to linger around Hermione in a way that he hopes is not creepy. She definitely has a time turner. He notes the magical and physical signs of exhaustion that hang around her small, thin frame, watch her disappear and reappear implausibly between classes. Despite himself, he's jealous. He certainly never was offered a time turner in either timeline. He brings it up one day to Professor McGonagall, nettled when she snaps at him for his admittedly rushed revision of a particularly complex section on the Fidelius charm. To be accurate, he snaps back, inquiring heatedly as to whether she cared so little for his work that she did not deem it necessary to give him a time turner over a 13-year-old. This forestalls whatever impressive admonition Professor McGonagall had been building to in her irritation. Instead, she blinks at him from behind her thin frames. Not that it is any of your business, but Miss Granger is serving as something as a trial subject for the ministry, she says crisply. Percy wars with himself for a second before asking in a tone he fervently hopes is not childish, and I was not considered. The headmaster specifically asked for a third-year student, McGonagall replies. He is fairly sure he was not successful in hiding his dismay. Miss Granger was an obvious choice. The foolish girl is determined to take all of the electives. Why? You'll have to ask her, I'm afraid. Percy shakes his head, thinking about Dumbledore requesting a third-year child. Obviously, it would be Hermione, but why? Why would he want Harry Potter's best friend to be given a time turner? Did Hermione have it for the entire timeline? Was that how Harry escaped certain death so frequently? Could Percy get a time turner? Would his body even allow him to use it? No, he says belatedly. I meant, why a third-year student? Professor McGonagall clucks her tongue disapprovingly. 13-year-olds, I suppose, are the youngest age to which we would consider giving a time turner. I'm against the entire endeavor myself, to be honest. Are you taking it back at the end of the year? Yes, and I shall be locking it away myself, so don't get any ideas, Mr. Weasley, she says, raising an arch eyebrow. Time turners are more limiting than you would believe, I'm afraid, particularly one that can only twist back roughly 7 hours. 7 hours is plenty of time to right a wrong. Do not even think about it, McGonagall intones harshly, undoubtedly seeing the calculating look steal into Percy's eyes. I will know it was you, and I will punish you, Mr. Weasley. Why don't more people have time turners? Clearly, if they are being given to a third year, they're not dangerous, Percy says, refusing to acknowledge the validity of her concern. Professor McGonagall settles into her chair and absent-mindedly pushes him a biscuit from the tray on her desk. He takes one, recognizing the look on her face. She means to teach him something. Are you familiar with the basic principles of time magic? Percy tries to keep his face neutral. Only the basics, he says innocently. I am surprised. It seems like something you would have researched, McGonagall comments accurately. She steeples her fingers together and continues. Time magic is a very old branch of magic. To be frank, not much is known about it. Very little has advanced in my lifetime, and likely several previous lifetimes. Even the unspeakables in the Ministry are really only replicating past rituals or utilizing old spells. I mention its age because time magic shares something rather unique with other ancient branches of magic. It has a cost. Something must be paid. Percy frowns. This does not exactly correlate with his previous research on the topic. She continues without giving him the chance to ask a question. Time turners demand the simplest cost of all: time. To use a time turner is to trade seconds, hours, days of your life for the chance to relive the past. You will continue to age. The cost is low, but so is the benefit. Very rarely are there recorded instances of a person actually changing the past. It is a paradox, Percy says, nodding. You change the past, and therefore you needed to change the past, so it is no longer a change. Yes, I suppose, McGonagall agrees slowly. Other rituals demand more. The advantage of a time turner is you return to your timeline, as it were, which is also what drives the time paradox. There are rituals to permanently send you back or forward in time, but the price is high. You lose the life you had before. There is no returning to your original timeline. Yes, Percy is intimately familiar with this cost. The reason the Ministry does not make time turners widely available is because they are really not the instruments of change that people believe them to be, his professor continues. The mass hysteria and anger that they would bring would far outweigh any benefit to the populace. Better to guard them and surround them with mystery. But you would consider letting students use them? Percy asks in a voice heavy with skepticism. Professor McGonagall acknowledges the hit with a gentle incline of her head. I defer to the headmaster's judgment on that, though you undoubtedly can guess my position. Percy would bet the philosopher's stone that Dumbledore has no intention of outfitting the entire student body with time turners, nor even a selective few. No, Hermione must have gotten the time turner because Dumbledore believed it would help Harry in some way. Why this year? Why a time turner? Something to do with Sirius Black or something to do with Pettigrew. Unless Percy vaguely recalls that Hermione is either a year older or a year younger than the rest of her peers. Her birthday is always celebrated in the common room right around the beginning of term. Perhaps Dumbledore knew that the trio would one day be running for their lives, and he simply wanted her to reach her majority. As Percy knows, his magic recognizes his true age, even now. Dumbledore may have figured there may be a time where Hermione would need to be 17 before the rest. Or perhaps it falls into Dumbledore's plans in a way that Percy was never, and will never be, privy to, as maddening as that may be. Percy will have to wait and watch.